All right, we're now looking at part B here. It says, let C of n be the value of the caravan and years after it was purchased. Assume that the value of the caravan has been depreciated using the flat rate method of depreciation. Write down a recursion relation in terms of this that models the value of the caravan. So this is what we need to use. Now, we've got a flat rate of depreciation here. So what are we going to do? Well, here is where I would look. And I would say, oh, we're after n years. So we're depreciating it based on yearly things that are happening here. Now, we're told that the average depreciation of the caravan per year is 2,750. So I can use this down here. And again, as we said, that's the whole point of a show that question. They normally use it when they want you to use it for another part. So just in case you weren't able to do part A correctly, you can still use this number for the subsequent parts. So I'm going to say C of 0 is equal to $38,000, comma, C of n plus 1 is equal to C of n minus $2,750, because that's how much it's depreciating each year. And that's how you do that question. Let's now look at the examiner's report. You can see that people, I'm again, not great. 33% of people got that right. Again, I think this is in 2016. If you brought it forward, I think people will do much better with this question. But still, not great stuff. That's what it should have looked like. That's what we wrote. A recursion relation has the initial value written first, followed by the recursion rule. Common errors included the failure to include the initial value, writing the initial value as Cn, not C0, using different symbols for different parts of the recursion relation. So for instance, that's correct. C of n is equal to using different symbols for different parts. What does that mean? Oh, I can see what they did wrong. I actually do this all the time. See how they went V of 0, then C of n and C of, like they used a V and then they used a C. Did I do that? No, I use C's, but sometimes I do that. That's a common error. Using a rule for the nth term. Oh, they're using a rule. We haven't seen that yet. We will see it, but it didn't want a rule. We'll talk more about that later when we come across rules. All right, that is how you do B. So just be careful with it. Don't make any silly mistakes. Let's just go on to the next one here. All right, let's read it. It says, the caravan has traveled an average of 5,000 kilometers in each of the 8 years since it was purchased. So the caravan has traveled an average of 5,000 kilometers in each year of the 8 years it was purchased. Assume that the value of the caravan has been depreciated using the unit cost method of depreciation. By how much is the value of the caravan reduced per kilometer traveled? All right, so this is where we've got to think for a moment and say, we know that each year we are depreciating this caravan by 2,750. If I know that each year I am driving on average 5,000 kilometers, well, if I divide that by 5,000, I can figure out how much I lose per kilometer. So it's going to be 0.55. So that means per kilometer, I lose 55 cents for every kilometer I go. Another way of thinking about this, if you do find that a little tricky, is you could say, what's another way of saying that? I think that is the easiest way to go about it in terms of answering it. That's the cleanest way. Let's look at our examiner's report. All right, they did go about it a bit differently. Let's see what they did, and then we can talk about it. 29% of people got that right, which again is not great. The answer was 0.55 per kilometer. Again, as long as you're at 0.55, you should be good for the mark. They're subtracting that. So what they've subtracted right there is simply, so they've done it a little bit differently. They have not done it per year again. They've done it in total. Okay, which is fine. So what they did is this. They said, we're losing 22,000 over the 8 years. So over the 8 years, we're losing $22,000 worth of the value. If I know that I'm traveling 5,000 kilometers over 8 years, I take that 5,000 and I times it by 8 to figure out how much I traveled over those 8 years. And then if you do that, you end up with 0.55. So it's actually the same thing. We just did it yearly. They did it over 8 years. So the total of it. There's whatever floats your boat there, but both are doing the same thing. So that's what they're working out is showing. And it's important that you understand both ways of thinking about it. A very common, I was going to say a very incorrect answer. A very common incorrect answer was $4.40 was found by ignoring the 8 years over which the depreciation occurred. Okay. So in other words, looking at how they did it, they didn't times it by 8. They thought it was like 5,000 over the 8 years, I think, instead of not each of them. Let's keep reading. Some responses were unreasonable in the context of the question. For example, in question 6C of the core section, it was unreasonable for the value of the caravan to decrease by $5,000 for every kilometer that it traveled. Yet this response was very occasionally given. Students are urged to consider their answers within the context of the question where possible. If the answer seems unreasonable, then an error has, sorry, can I read this again? I can't read. If the answer seems unreasonable, then an error has been made, and this error may be found and corrected if time permits. So in other words, think about it for a second. Does it make sense? Does your answer make sense? They can't be losing 5,000 kilometers. Can't be losing $5,000 per kilometer. That's madness. All right. Hopefully that made sense, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.